Okay, let's talk about Bangladesh. It's one of the fastest growing economies on the entire planet. But that incredible growth comes with a huge challenge: energy. The country is absolutely booming, but it's staring down a critical energy problem that has a lot of people thinking. So let's get right into it. First things first, let's set the stage with this number: 8%. That's the country's recent GDP growth. And you have to understand, that's not just a number on a spreadsheet. That's the sound of new factories firing up, production lines getting longer. And all of it, every single bit, needs more and more power. And when I say more power, I mean a lot more. The demand is just staggering. By 2030, the forecast for peak energy demand is expected to hit 33,700 megawatts. That is a massive, massive jump, and it puts an incredible amount of pressure on the country's entire energy grid. So that brings us to the million-dollar question, right? Where is all that energy going to come from? Sure, you can build new power plants, but that's a slow, super expensive process with its own environmental costs. But what if there's another way? What if there's a gigantic source of energy that's being completely overlooked? Turns out, this hidden source isn't some new gas field or a revolutionary piece of technology. It's something much simpler: energy efficiency. And look, we're not talking about just changing a few light bulbs here. We're talking about a resource so huge it could literally change the country's entire energy future. So, how big are we talking? Well, research shows that inside Bangladesh's most energy-hungry industries, a shocking 8 to 10% of all energy is just being wasted. And get this, you don't need some futuristic, expensive technology to capture it. All it takes is better energy management. And that right there, that's the core of the paradox. It just doesn't make sense. You've got billions of taka in potential savings just lying on the table, a huge chunk of the national energy demand that could be met. So why isn't it happening? Well, that is the mystery we're going to solve today. So our investigation starts by going right inside the factories that are using all this power. And it turns out the first clues to solving this whole thing aren't on the factory floor, they're up in the management offices. And boom, here's our first big clue. It's a bit of a bombshell, actually. When researchers looked at 36 of these big energy-intensive companies, they found that only just one of them, had a dedicated full-time person in charge of managing energy. That's less than 3%. For everyone else, managing what is one of their biggest costs is basically a side hustle for some other manager. This quote from the study really just hammers the point home. The number of actual energy experts is, and I'm quoting here, negligible. It's not a small gap, it's a huge one. I mean, if no one's actual job is to manage energy, how can you ever expect it to be managed well? Okay, clue number 2, a major strategic blind spot. More than 2/3 of these companies have no long-term energy strategy at all. They pretty much ignore any investment that won't pay for itself in 3 years or less. This tells us everything. The real problem here isn't a lack of technology, it's a lack of vision. They're so focused on today's costs that they are missing out on enormous long-term wins. All right, so we know there's a big management problem, but what's really stopping them from fixing it? Now, you'd probably assume the number one issue is money, right? Lack of capital. But the data, well, the data tells a very different story. It's a bit of a plot twist. Yeah, you see, while not having enough money can be a problem, it is not the main bad guy in this story. The research found that the real top barriers were actually organizational and political. Things like internal bureaucracy, red tape, and a total lack of support from senior leadership. Those were seen as much bigger problems than actually finding the cash. And the numbers back this up completely. Just look. The top-ranked barrier isn't lack of money, it's inadequate support from administration, with bureaucratic intricacy right behind it. These aren't problems of poverty, they are problems of policy and process. They're all these internal hurdles that just stop good ideas dead in their tracks. Okay, so we've identified the culprits, the things holding progress back. Now let's flip the script. Let's look at what actually works. What successfully pushes these industries to finally take action? And the answer couldn't be clearer. The number one driver, the thing that works best, is having an energy blueprint, a real long-term strategy. You see how that directly fights against that short-term thinking we saw earlier? Right after that, of course, is the promise of cost savings, and this is crucial, clear rules and regulations from the government. So when you put the barriers and the drivers right next to each other, the solution just becomes so obvious. These industries aren't screaming for cash handouts. What they're really responding to are clear plans, strong regulations, and defined strategies. They need a roadmap to follow. All right, we've got the clues, we know the motives, we understand the barriers. Let's get to the final section and see how we can put all these pieces together, solve this mystery, and unlock all that incredible potential. But before we reveal that final piece of the puzzle, let's just pause on this number one last time. 8 to 10%. Just let that sink in. This isn't just a number. It's the prize. That's the amount of energy that could be powering new growth, slashing costs, and taking a huge strain off the entire nation. That's why solving this is so important. Now, the research points to a very specific kind of company as being a key part of the solution. They're called energy service companies, or ESCOs. Basically, these are firms that specialize in exactly the kind of expertise that Bangladesh's industries are missing. You can think of these ESCOs as like a one-stop shop for energy efficiency. They can come in, do detailed audits, give you all the technical advice you need, and even help you finance the projects. Crucially, they provide the hard data and the concrete plans that can finally convince skeptical managers and help cut through all that red tape we were talking about. They're basically purpose-built to fill these gaps. Which brings us to our final nagging question. If these expert companies exist, and they seem like the perfect solution of the problem, why aren't industries hiring them? What is the final missing piece of this puzzle? The answer, it turns out, is almost shockingly simple. As you can see from this chart, the number one reason industries don't hire an ESCO is because of inadequate information about ESCOs. Put simply, they just don't know that this kind of expert help even exists. The solution is out there, but nobody knows about it. And that's really our final takeaway. This isn't just a story about technology or money. It's a story about management, about strategy, and at the end of the day, about information. And it leaves us with a really powerful question. If an 8% efficiency gain is just sitting there, waiting to be unlocked, what is the true cost of just not knowing that a better way exists?